Yes. Yes. She's now live. You see her? No, you should. Yes, you are live, and the microphone is also working. In 10 seconds.
And do I hear something?
Does she hear something? Give me a sign when she can.
Hello, I'm Petra de Sutter. I'm a MEP candidate from the Flemish Greens. I have been a politician for the last 5 years. I was a member of the Belgian Senate and also the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. So I have some experience in European politics, be it in the fields of human rights, democracy and rule of law. Items that become more and more important today, as we all realize. And I also have to add that my background is, I'm a medical doctor. I'm a gynecologist, specialist in reproductive medicine. I'm, by the way, in the hospital right now where I'm between 2 patients talking to you. But of course, now really focusing on the elections of the 26th of May, hopefully getting into the European Parliament afterwards. I'm very happy to be here and to listen to your questions and trying to answer them. So please go ahead. Something is wrong. I don't see or hear anything. Can somebody give some instructions or advice? Nothing happens. I don't see any questions. I can't.
Nothing? You
What?
don't see any. I don't understand.
Was I here? Oké.
Okay.
En nu, wat moet ik hier nu doen?
And now it's no better?
What's happening? Ja, ik heb... Something is wrong. I don't see or hear anything. Can somebody give some instructions or advice? Nothing happens. I don't hear any questions. I can't. Yes. Anyone seeing this or listening, or can anyone help? Don't know what happens.
No questions. She has to put on the live.
Ah, okay. Do I see a question by Yasmina Lazovic? I can read the question first. What is the EU supposed to do in order to assure that minority voices are heard and their identities recognized in different areas? In the cultural sector, with educational, health, social systems, and across entire Europe, not just particular countries? That's an interesting question. I think I would first want to say that in the EU, it is clearly in the treaties that cultural diversity has to be protected and is part of the I would say the jobs that the EU has to do to bring people together in the European Union in the cultural sector by investing in programs like Creative Europe, which is trying to raise funds for increasing the possibility of having cultural activities, mobility of artists across the EU, not in just particular countries. And minority voices are, in my view, an important part of this because they need protection. We really are united in our diversity. I believe it's a very important value of the EU that is under threat, of course, and maybe that is why the question is asked. And we know that populist right-wing parties try to reduce the whole issue of culture and also minority rights to exclusive nationalist agendas, which are contrary to the EU values. So we have to do exactly the opposite. Now, the EU, of course, has limited competences, except by the programs that they have to try to help the cultural sector. You also ask about education, social systems, health. If you ask me, I believe that the EU so far has been failing in bringing citizens together in these areas. It has been focusing on economic and financial elements way too much. This is why probably a lot of citizens don't believe in the EU anymore. And it is just by giving social protection, by having social standards that are in all member states equal and give access to healthcare, to good quality education and so on, that we will again try to gain the hearts of people for Europe again. And in that way, culture is clearly a very strong element in that equation, because it really can bring people together. There is something in my mind as a common cultural heritage that brings us together in the EU, in Europe today, which is under threat. And we have to fight very hard. And we will have to do that in the next legislation, of course. For instance, by raising the budget for projects like Creative Europe and trying to fight against the destructive populist agendas that want to go back to the nation states and to, a conglomerate of all different nations talking different languages and having their own cultural identity. That would be destructive for the whole European idea, if you ask me. I can continue a long time on this issue, of course. It has to do with identity. It has to do with the cleavage that we see politically right now occurring in Europe. It has to do with migration. It has to do with religion. We can really expand on that. But I hope there will be other questions before I talk the whole time about this. I still hope people can hear and see me. I have no feedback whatsoever. So if somebody can give a comment or ask another question, please feel free to do so. Any feedback? I don't see. Okay. All right. Good. I have other questions. Thank you. Do you feel national politicians defend enough the EU projects? And what are your expectations of the upcoming elections? Well, going further on that question, no, national politicians do not defend the EU project. Again, they use Europe if they see fit to it, if they think they have a benefit by doing so, if they did something there. But the member states in the council, of course, are very powerful. And if they don't want to go further, then they will blame Brussels for the bad decisions that the EU is making. This is one of the construction errors, in my view, of the EU as it is now. And national politicians should defend the EU project much more, because the EU is, of course, also the member states. And citizens, voters should realize that by voting for their national politicians, they are also shaping the EU, because it is these national politicians that will be the ministers in the council that will take decisions at the EU level. It's very interconnected. My expectations of the upcoming elections, well, I hope that we will be able to have a progressive alliance in a way that can give a counterweight, that can stop the rising populist right-wing movement in the EU that actually has only one agenda, and that is to destroy the project. And it is about values. It is about the Enlightenment values. It is about democracy, rule of law, and human rights, which I've been working on in the Council of Europe, as I said, and which I feel are crucial. We have maybe been thinking too easily the last decades that we were moving in the right direction and everything was fine. We had more liberties, more freedoms, more rights for minorities, for all kinds of citizens, and we didn't see that there was a counter reaction, which now is growing and more strong and threatening to the whole project. So we'll have to fight that in the next election and the next 5 years. Let me see, because I have a lot of interesting questions. I'll take the one on science. Cornelia Kiss, who says scientists are saying that in order to save the planet, we need to reduce our consumption. However, well, disillusionized people are turning to populism because they believe the standard of living is falling. How should we tackle the tension? It's a very important question, very good question. I'm an ecologist, I'm a green politician. So I think that yeah, well, I'm not sure if scientists are saying that we should reduce our consumption. I think scientists are saying, and eco-modernists are saying that we can use technology to solve all the problems and climate change and so on. And we need nuclear energy, GMO technology and so on to do that. And technology will solve all the problems. I think that's a mistake. I think technology can solve a lot of problems. It can bring new problems. And you are in the treadmill paradox. That means that new technology solves problems that bring along new problems where you need new technology to solve them. And I really can say that I speak as a scientist myself. So there is limits to science, believe it or not. And the dogma that science will solve everything is not correct. Now, reducing consumption, of course. I mean, there are limits to our resources, to our planet. And we are absolutely exhausting the planet and all the resources that we have. So if we don't reduce our consumption, think different about everything, energy, transport, mobility, and so on, yes, we will leave no future for the next generations. This is core to the Greens programs, of course, as you understand. Now, people are afraid of that. Yes, they turn to populists that give easy solutions to these problems, but they're false solutions. They're short-term solutions. They reduce things to cost and say, who's going to pay? The question is not, it's going to cost to stop climate change, for instance, and who's going to pay? The question is, who's going to pay if we don't stop it? Because the price will be much higher then, and the next generations will be the ones that pay. To me, this is simply not ethical. It's a matter of solidarity, not only between us, but also with the next generations. Sorry. And with the planet and its future. So how should we tackle the tension? By explaining this to people, by making them understand what is at stake. And what I often use as a comparison is giving up our freedom to do as we like, to fly every month wherever we want, in or outside Europe, to consume as we wish. That's a kind of freedom that people want to defend. And they don't want to restrict that freedom for climate change or for the sake of the planet. But they're willing to do that. The same populist parties definitely are willing to do that if it is to protect our security. Look at what happens with our privacy, with our right our rights, our civil rights, actually, that are threatened under the you know, or for the sake of security and all kinds of threats, which are often imaginary. But anyhow, there people are ready to give up their freedom, but they're not ready to give them the freedom to consume and to destroy our environment and our climate. It's very interesting. And I think we should really make them aware of this paradox. I'll trying to move forward and see if there's other questions. Because there's so many. How can we promote the unique form of European identity more efficient so that we can fight effectively against the negative attitudes towards it? Thank you. Well, that's a very good question. I believe that Europe, which has been, as I said before, a financial economic project, should be much more of a social project, should protect people, make sure that people have social rights, access to healthcare and so on in different member states. And of course, in the framework of this event, I think culture can really be the cement, can really be the way to bring people together. So I believe that culture, education, Erasmus is of course a very good example of this you know, this idea of creating or enhancing a form of European identity. I believe there is something like European identity. People say, well, we have so many languages, so many cultures, so many histories and so on. And still, in a way, there is something like a common European heritage and culture and identity. And we have to indeed promote it again by education, by making people enthusiastic again for the European project, but the European project of citizens, that protects the citizens, that put the citizens' interests in the first place, and not, unfortunately, only focus on economy and financial interests and the interests of multinationals that don't pay taxes and so on. Of course, we can go into that. It's another subject. But this is, of course, the idea that people have from Europe. And then Europe is very far away from their interests. And so Europe becomes the enemy or something they don't want to belong to anymore. I think we have, as politicians, but probably as all, you know, motivated citizens, as you are listening here, we can do a lot to talk about this to people and say, you know, you're mistaken. Europe really is part of your life. Your own politicians are part of the decision-making bodies at the European level, through the Council again. So hold them responsible, hold them accountable for their decisions, and make sure that you understand and everybody understands that our common interest is the interest of all of us. We're all connected. We're all part of one and the same Europe. This is something we have to convince people of. And it's not an easy thing because there's so much fake news, there's so much right-wing populists saying the opposite. And we have to have that fight every day again, and definitely also in the European Parliament. Let me check further. Right, well, I will come to culture. There's a lot of questions on the music sector, how to regulate, what are the challenges, how I personally want to work with the culture sector and its representatives. I must say, I'm not a cultural representative, or I'm you know, I like music, I play some instruments, but I'm not a professional in the culture sector, so this is not my core business. But as a Green, in our program, I can say that culture is a very important subject that really needs to bring people together, because we have so much division, so much hate speech, so much cleavage in our society, and culture can overcome that. Of that, I'm absolutely convinced. So it's a leverage, it's an instrument that the EU can use to again enhance the European identity idea, but in a constructive and in an inclusive and positive way, not in another way. And so we have to raise the budgets of the projects that are trying to help the culture sector. I'm gonna drink a little bit. I'm sorry for that. As I said, the budget for the Creative Europe program now has already been raised to, I think, 1.85 billion euros for the next 7 years. I understand that Culture Action Europe wants even to double it to 3 billion. And I can fully understand the value of that, because artistic freedom, cultural identity is a way to fight the populism that we see. And so personally, as an MEP, I will clearly support all initiatives that go in that direction. So I'm definitely willing to make that pledge. I'm going to see again if there is other questions. No new ones now. Which are the main challenges of the working conditions of educators and teachers? Where is the space and what are the methods to improve them? Furthermore, how can we ensure continuous professional development of teachers and educators? Well, education, but also I would say research, scientific research, next to culture, the arts and so on, are all part of a positive agenda to bring people together. First of all, now the challenges, these are all member states' competences. We cannot, EU cannot interfere in educational systems in member states, but they can do that in an indirect way, of course, with all the funds and all the budgets that are available. And we should promote that. We should really understand that investing in education, making the conditions better, maybe providing more means for mobility. As for students, we have the Erasmus projects. Why not for teachers? Why not for artists? We can fund that from the EU side. And by the way, Erasmus should not only be restricted to the highly educated students and university students. It should be expanded to less educated and more professionally skilled people. All young people, all boys and girls should have the opportunity during their education time to travel to other European countries, and the EU should fund that. So we would want to also expand the Erasmus project. Then Andrea Codriano, thank you very much. That's a very nice remark, because I'm not a cultural expert, but very nice to see that you appreciate what I say. For me, culture is just as important as education, as science, as environment, as nature, and it's part of my political engagement. I'm very sensitive to culture and art as an amateur musician, as I just said. And I really believe it brings people together and can make people better. I know there's a lot of discussion on that, but I would think that it is possible to raise the sensitivity of people to arts, to culture, to creativity, and in that way to increase the European feeling of the European identity. And I know that it is often underfunded. There's a very, very few funding of the cultural sector in any country. I know in my country, it's less than 1% for the arts. And that's a pity, because we could make better citizens, more sensitive people from our citizens by raising their sensitivity to culture and arts. That is my profound conviction. And again, it's all about economic growth and jobs. And yes, it's important for welfare, understand that. But I think well-being is important as well. Well-being, we know that mental health problems are on the rise and are really responsible for a lot of suffering, even deaths. And I think the arts and culture can be a therapy for that evolution in our societies as they evolve right now. So, all right. What do you think about? 5 minutes. They tell me time is so limited. What do you think about the regions with less opportunities? Do you think we young people could have the opportunity to improve them, and the EU should help us. Yes, of course, there is a cohesion funds and projects that should focus on regions with less opportunities. And we can talk about the cultural sector, we can talk about minority rights, but of course also in terms of economy, of agriculture, whatever. I think it's absolutely important that we have the solidarity mechanisms that the EU have to help regions which are left behind, where there's a lot of unemployment. And yes, young people are extremely important in that. When I see young people talking about the EU, and hopefully you will agree with me that a lot of young people are still interested in Europe, and we have to make sure that that number grows, that people are more and more interested in the EU. Young people are the future. They are the ones why we're doing our jobs in the parliament. It's I'm 55. I'm willing to tell that to you, and I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing that for the next generations, because I think it's our responsibility. And so yes, the EU has, of course, to do its job and make sure that all regions are helped to improve in all aspects that contribute to welfare, but also well-being. How can we encourage critical thinking and media literacy in people of all ages, particularly in an area of large quantities of information? It's a good one, because it has to do with fake news. It has to do with how can we be confident that media and, of course, social media are reliable and that people are correctly informed. Well, I think it's responsibility of media. It's responsibility of social media platforms, Facebook and others. And the EU has to watch carefully that this is indeed being done. Fake news has to be sanctioned. And in the educational system in schools, we have to teach young people how to distinguish, the fake news from real news, how to fact check the information that they get, how to know if they can trust or not. It's not easy, I understand that. But we have to tackle this at different levels, policy levels. We have to make sure that the responsibility of the big players are addressed, and we have to educate people so that they are able to think for themselves and to be critical. It's a challenge, because we know that populists are easy to be followed, because they give easy solutions to difficult problems, easy solutions that are fake solutions, believe me. But well, people are satisfied with these easy solutions, and of course they work on the fear and the anxiety of people, and they reassure them, and that's why they win elections. And yeah, critical thinking is so important. It's one of the adagios or the slogans of my own university, University of Ghent. The slogan is dare to think. Durf denken, dare to think. It's important. It's the legacy of the Enlightenment. We have to really be critical in everything and don't believe just anything that you read or see, because we're overwhelmed indeed with information. And of course, yeah, governments, politics, politicians have responsibilities there, have to be, put laws in place to safeguard that information that is there is correct. Okay, and then I will end with the last question, which is, of course, as a green politician, I like the question on climate change and sustainable future. We're running out of time. Well, in this session also, I just have 2 minutes. What is the most urgent thing? Well, to really make sure that we're ambitious enough to reach our goals in terms of CO2 emission reduction and energy efficiency and so on. So these really have to be reached, because if we don't do that within the next 10, 11, 12 years, something like that, we'll have a planet where it will be difficult to live in a good way. That means there will be conflicts, inequality, economic challenges, etc. if we get over the 2 degrees raise of temperature. So we are running out of time. And so if people ask me, what are your top 3 priorities in the next in the next 5 years, I would say climate, climate, and climate. We have to rethink our economic systems. We have to go for system change, but in a social correct way, because there may not be victims. It's not the most vulnerable people that have to pay the price. It is the ones that pollute, and it is the ones with the largest financial possibilities. It's the multinationals. It's the very rich people that don't pay taxes, that evade taxes. You know that every year 1,000 billion of euros is lost as tax income because of fraud or evasion. So think about what we can do with that money every year. 6 times the total budget of the EU can be invested in climate change measures and circular economy and all the transitions, energy transition that we have to do to make our economy sustainable and in line with the Paris Agreement. So this is the most important thing. Thank you for that question. And since now it's 1 o'clock, I suppose I have to stop. I'm not sure if, yes, this is the end. Thank you so much. I had some technical problems at the beginning. I hope that at least you could listen or hear my answers. And it was very nice to do this. It's the first time that I do this kind of chatting. And I'm very, I would be very happy to do it again anytime. Thank you so much. And keep up believing in the European project. Go vote. Make sure that the right people win the elections. Thank you so much. Okay.